But that heart, it is encapsulated in what is currently our best attempt to name the direction of our church in a sentence. And it is, we want to be people who follow Jesus. And almost more than that, if you can say that, we want to be people who are with Jesus. Not just doing stuff for him, but we are people with Jesus. And we want to follow him into the adventure, and it is an adventure, of whole life and authentic community. Sadly, it's interesting as we've been wrestling for the words, and I've been processing this week and watching and listening, particularly this week, it's becoming more and more clear to me that we are living in a world that is increasingly robbing us, increasingly, of whole life. Increasingly, we are finding distractions. We are spending, statistically, more and more time in fantasy worlds, in front of televisions, and I heard a stat this week that just disturbed me. Now, in America, 65% of men admit to using pornography more than once a week. I think that is a symptom. It's horrific. More and more of us, as the author said, living lives of quiet desperation, where we don't know what whole life looks like. And increasingly, we are becoming isolated, and the idea of authentic community is foreign. Even in our churches. Because somehow we've thought church is about what happens on a Sunday morning, not what happens between people. And so when we say we want to be followers of Jesus, and we believe he's calling us into the adventure of whole life and authentic community, you better know what we are saying is we feel called to step into a life that is different than what is normal in the world. And for many of us, it means stepping into a life that is different than we are currently living. We're going to have to learn new ways of doing life. As we turn over the page, we were talking about last week that because we love God, and it's more than that, I think like I said, this is a draft document. We've got to find ways of capturing our heart well. Like it's more than because we love God, it's because he loves us. Because we love God and he loves us, because we want to follow Jesus. Because we want to be shaped by the Word and not the world. Because we want to be open to the guidance of the Holy Spirit who is inviting us into truth. We aspire to be a church where we actually follow Jesus. We actually follow Jesus and reflect his hope. Not our programs, not our worked up enthusiasm, not our preferences. We reflect his hope. And not just on a Sunday morning, but in the places where we live, where we learn, where we work, and where we play. We aspire to be a church where each of us From Skylar to... I'm not going to try and think of who the oldest one is. But each of us is growing in integrity and maturity. You don't get a pass when you get grey hair. You don't get a pass from growing when you're 3. That each of us is growing in integrity and maturity on the unique adventure of whole life to which we're called. You are unique. There will never be another you, but there is a plan for your life. And as Heather was saying, sometimes God fashions that plan from the mess and dirt of your mistakes and your pain. And that's what grace looks like. And again, to quote you two, grace finds beauty in ugly things. That somehow God is able to take the messy bits of your life and the beautiful bits of your life and fashion a story that is uniquely yours. And we want to be that kind of church when each of us is stepping into that place and we have each other's backs. We want to be the kind of church where it's not comfortable to be comfortable. We actually want to be an authentic community. Like we really do. Whenever this church has been at its best, there has been this beautiful sense of family. Over the last 70 years, whenever this church has been at its best, there's been a beautiful sense of family. But I think God's saying, come on guys, time to actually step into it. Time to actually be the family of God. Time to actually have each other's backs. Time to actually know who you are and who others are, and to care. We want to be an authentic community where nobody stands alone on the journey of life. We last week introduced, and I've had feedback from a number of quarters saying, gee, you tried to do a lot in one sermon last week. Sorry about that. I'll try and do a little less this week. We'll see how we go. We introduced what we call core practices. And the reason we call them core practices is the understanding that being a disciple of Jesus is not just about how your emotional world's going or what you do on a Sunday morning, but it's how you choose to train your life. There's a big difference between trying and training. And as I said last week, you can try to run a marathon tomorrow if you want. You can do a lot better if you train to do a marathon. Welcome to the marathon of life. And if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you can try if you want. Let me tell you, you can do a lot better if you train. And Jesus knew that. He introduced all these practices. The New Testament church, through the history of the church, there have been practices that have been important. So we said that there are core practices we know we need to help us keep focused on God. Things like learning how to fast and pray. Things like observing Sabbath, listening to God, not just reading the Bible, but learning the Bible. Things like offering our tithes and time as acts of worship, and fundamentally the act of worship relating to God in his right place. So these are, what we're suggesting is, these are practices, each one of which deserves, months of talking about and wrestling with, and over the next 10 years or so, we'll be coming back and back to these things. But these are some of the practices. They're not all the practices, but there's some of the key practices that will help us keep our attention in the right place, to help us look upwards to who Jesus is, and to be shaped as his followers. We suggested that there are practices we need to help us look beyond ourselves and actually live that whole life. There is a correlation between taking your eyes off yourself and finding your story. And so we pinched these from a fellow called Michael Frost, because Graham Pickett came to me, a few weeks ago and said, "Mate, this book's fantastic." He'd been off to a conference, but Michael Frost used the acronym BELLS, and I went out to dinner with my wife, and she said, "What's a bell? Our church doesn't have bells." So we changed the acronym to BLESS because it's a bit easy to remember and actually is at the heart of what it means to find your story. You are not here to take up space. You are here to bless the world. This world should be different because you're here. If the aim of your life is to be comfortable, I hope you are not comfortable in this church. Because if the aim of your life is to be comfortable, you will be losing your life. There are practices like learning to bless people, learning to listen to the Holy Spirit in the day-to-day, moment-to-moment cut and thrust of real life, learning to share meals with people, eat with people, studying Jesus' way, learning to say, "Okay, Jesus, you're my model. How do I live your way?" And work out, if Jesus does it this way, that means I need to try and find a way to copy that, which actually has some pretty significant implications for us. And discovering that you are sent with a purpose. There is a unique purpose for your life. And your journey with Jesus is to find and fulfill the calling, and there is a calling that is on your life. I don't know what it is, but he does. And your task is to be on that adventure with him. And then we said that we also need, and again, this is going to be challenging in fronting too, we need to learn to be an authentic community, and there are practices we're going to need to get into place that the Bible talks about. And you can go to many corporate kind of training sessions and they'll talk about it too. But as a church, I think we've got to discover in a new way. The first one, it was in the acronym of SHARE, and the first one was, what does it actually mean to speak the truth in love? Really? What does it mean to move beyond politeness? And not club people over the head, but to learn to have the courage, and it will always take courage to speak the truth in love. There'll be some people who like speaking the truth, but aren't so keen on the love bit, and some people who are keen on the love bit who aren't so keen on the truth bit, but it will always take courage to speak the truth in love. And that is at the heart of what a true community is. We were just talking about that at the Foundations course yesterday, as we looked at the Johari window and what it means to give feedback. What does it mean to have space, genuine space? And what I mean by that is both time and heart space. Like you need space in your calendar and you need space in your heart for other people if you're going to have any kind of experience of fellowship at all. What does it mean to actively listen? As we've said early on in my time here, if you want to get to know someone, you need to listen for at least 7 minutes, because 7 minutes generally is the threshold of small talk. And once you get beyond the 7 minutes, then you actually start to have a real conversation. Many of us fill our weeks with less than 7-minute conversations, so we never get to know anybody. What does it mean to get to know people? What does it mean to reflect grace? Let me tell you, it is not going to be easy to be an authentic community, because I'm here and I'm messy and I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to hurt you. But I know something about you too. You're here, you're messy, and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to hurt people. So it is only going to be grace and a miracle of the Holy Spirit that holds us together as a church family. And we need to reflect that grace if the community is going to be real. And we need to learn to encourage one another. We need to learn. I love that the French word, which comes from the French, literally means put heart into. We've got to put heart into one another. We need encouragement to be our DNA. And I love there are people amongst us who are naturally good at it, but we've all got to practice it. And these practices will be kind of the glue that we have to work on to become the people God is calling us to be. So that's what we've said so far, is our sense of the direction God's calling us to. The next words are, all of this means we are committed to. This is, and again, we've got to decide whether this is true. We're coming up to our vision forum. You can say, no, we don't want to be committed to anything. You know, we want to have a nice, safe little church. We could say that if you want. If you need to find another pastor. But if you can. This is how Baptist churches work. We have to decide together what God's saying. All of this means we're committed to. Commitment is a big deal, particularly in this moment in our culture, where the primary thing for all of us seems to be in our culture that the primary value is that you should be free to do what you want to do in this moment. Commitment is countercultural because commitment reduces your options. When you are committed to something, in order to say yes to something, you're saying no to other things. When I committed to Leanne, I reduced significantly my options. In a good way. You see, this ring means I'm taken. And I'm not going to get into a relationship with any other woman because I am Leanne's husband. I am committed to her. Commitment requires making a choice and sticking with it. And so when we say we're committed, it is not a light thing. And I believe that one of the great challenges and part of the reason our world is, fragmenting a bit is there are not enough committed people to the right things. Margaret Mead, the social anthropologist, said, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And I don't know how to tell you this. I believe God wants to use you to change the world. You will not change much until you get to the point where you say, yeah, God, I'm ready to commit. I'm ready to stop holding back. I'm ready to stop equivocating. I'm ready to step in. John Maxwell, one of those Americans I don't like watching on videos, but from time to time we'll quote because he says some helpful things. Sorry, I probably shouldn't say things like that. But he says this, and I've had it up on my wall before because it's really helpful. Until I'm committed, there's a hesitancy, a chance to draw back. But the moment I definitely commit myself, then God moves also. And a whole stream of events erupts. All manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, persons, and material assistance, which I could never have dreamed would come my way, begin to flow towards me the moment I make a commitment. And so this is my question for you. What are you committed to? It's these days not normal to even commit to a church. Let me tell you, you will not experience anything like authentic community if you're not committed to a bunch of people through thick and thin, because we're messy. And authentic community only happens through commitment. It's like a marriage only happens through commitment. Just like anything of use only happens through commitment. And we live in a world that says, whatever you do, don't commit to anything but feeling good. I know for me, I know the power of commitment. Last night I met my cousins Helen and Howard, and it was actually at Howard Pay's place in Mount Stewart. I was a young bloke, I was 20, and he said, we went to there for morning tea. I was in Hobart on placement after doing Bible college with Fusion, and it felt like my whole world was falling apart because all the theories I'd learnt in Bible college about how things were meant to work weren't working. Like many Bible college students, I had all the right ideas and not a clue. Again, I probably shouldn't say things like that, but and that's not to discount the importance of Bible college, it's very important. But when it's all ideology, you know, you've got to do the work. And he said something. He said, Matt, someone has to dig in here at Hobart. Since Craig, who's actually here this morning, founded and helped get Fusion in Hobart moving, there have been leaders coming and going all the time and things haven't been strong. Someone has to dig in. And my immediate response was to want to throw up. Because I knew God was saying, Matt, guess what? That's you. And I don't know, because often in my life when God's invited me to do something, that's often the feeling I have. I don't think that's particularly a spiritual response. But there was something. I had this internal battle. I don't know if you know. I don't know if you know that God's asking you to do something, and there'll often be an internal battle, and He won't force you one way or another. Let me tell you. But I remember after about 3 days of wrestling, driving to the top of Mount Wellington, looking out over Hobart, and saying, "Yep, God, I'm willing. I'm willing to do what it takes, whatever you ask me, for the sake of this city." And let me tell you, that was a turning point. Because for the first time, I wasn't then looking for people to say, what should I do, or tell me what to do. Somehow, the moment you're committed, you start to have a rudder on your boat. You start to be able to you start to know where you're going. And that did not make everything easy. I stuffed up so many times, I damaged so many people, I made so many mistakes. And I wanted to give up over and over and over again. But that commitment carried me through. And it was interesting sitting in Canada during an Alpha course, actually, watching another American talk on video, and God bringing that memory back to me and saying, Matt, guess what? I'm calling you back to Hobart. That commitment you made, I'm holding you to that. And one of the things I have to acknowledge is, for those in Lena Valley, I was acknowledging earlier that I went to the Global Leadership Summit yesterday, or Friday. The days are running into each other at the moment. And there's part of me has quite enjoyed. I've loved getting to know you. I've loved the sense that God's up to something here at Citywide, and I've enjoyed starting to work on growing the church. And it was like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, Matt, this GLS thing, the job isn't to grow a church. That's not your job. Matt, look at the name of the church. There is a city that is desperate for hope. There are little kids in Hobart putting up with things that kids shouldn't have to put up with. There are people looking for homes in Hobart. There are hundreds of older people desperately lonely. There are thousands of Christians turning up to church on a Sunday morning and thinking that's what the whole game's about. There are teenagers living lives vicariously because they feel powerless to live their real lives now. So they spend hours in front of screens rather than in front of people. He said, and I had this sense, I had this picture actually of Skylar and Emily and some of the little kids that are amongst us. Said, Matt, the job of Citywide is to be preparing a city for them, a city where they can find their true story, where they are not going to be abused, where they are going to be free to step into all that God has for them. The job of Citywide is not to grow a church, but to care about a city and and to be ready to care about a world. So it's interesting as we say what we're committed to. We say we're committed to serve our city and its people. I don't exactly know the form of words, but I actually think that's a bit safe. See, that's a bit passive. I believe, you'll have to work out where you fit in this, but God has called us to have a vision and his heart for this city. And to see what a city of Hobart would look like if it was built on foundations laid by God and not laid by self-interest or politicians or people's mess. Where each and every one of us was doing the work to step into the calling that God has on us. And that it's not going to be our programs that do it. But I do think we are called, as Jeremiah says, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into. And it's interesting, he was talking in that, saying, I've carried you into exile. He was talking to the Jewish exiles. He's saying, in the midst of this city who serves false gods, who has their priorities wrong, I want you to be my representatives to bring my peace. I actually think we need to lift our eyes. Lift our eyes off ourselves. You need to lift your eyes off yourself. We need to lift our eyes from the church. We need to look at the city and care in the way God cares. In Acts 17, it says, Paul was waiting for them in Athens and he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. What about our city greatly distresses you? What about this world greatly distresses you? I think it's so possible to be so distracted by a self-centered life that the only things that distress you are the things that get in the road of your ego. Like the traffic in Hobart, if it could be called that. Or the weather in Hobart, look, which after coming from Canada is ridiculous, you know. We live in a world that is desperate for hope. We live in a city that is desperate for hope. And it is absolutely clear the old ways of doing church will not cut it into the future. church has to be more than a Sunday morning service. It has to be about what does it mean to live with integrity as followers of Jesus. It has to be a place where you are stepping into the story you have, and that we together have your back, and that together we work out what does it mean to love and serve our city. It means doing things a bit different. On the back of the document we say things we want to work on next 12 to 18 months. One of the things we believe it's right for us to think about working on is developing strategies for our 3 congregations and the Lena Valley and Mornington properties based on prayer and community research. I think it's going to be right for us to find a way to change that word to say, find that language, say, develop strategies for our city. Somehow, I don't know. So that it's not just about what we do for our churches, but that it is based on, we need to know what the families in Mornington and Moraine are coping with. Did you know that Mornington Moraine has the highest death rate in Australia? No one actually knows why. But as a church placed here, I think we've got to care about that, don't you? We've got to know what the kids up the street, what life is like for them. More than just Mornington Moraine, but I think we have a particular responsibility in the places where we're placed. And I'm still trying to wrestle with what does it mean, the northern suburbs of Hobart. There just hasn't been a healthy church there for... The churches keep hitting brick walls in the northern suburbs of Hobart. And if we are going to truly be Citywide, we're going to have to work out what does it mean to either partner with other churches there or do something about that in the future, I believe. We also want to make the pursuit of justice an integral part of our community life, that we don't avoid the difficult questions, that we don't avoid the fact that domestic violence is going through the roof. That kids are getting abused. That companies are ripping money out of families' hands who can least afford it by putting poker machines in places where poker machines shouldn't be. Where we care about issues of justice. And we want to actually put a little team together to help us as a church family think and respond to these kinds of things. It's our sense of some of the things that might be right for us to focus on. Similarly, I think we're going to want to put little teams together to help us do the research to know what are the issues in our city and in the Mornington Moraine area, the Lena Valley area. How do our buildings not just be churches but be community hubs where people see and experience the love of God and see and experience hope? What does it mean for us to be intentional and step out and take risks, not based on our personal preferences, but based on what this city needs? And so we're going to need teams to help us wrestle with those questions in the next 12 to 18 months. The second point is I think God is inviting us to be a welcoming family who love and respect our neighbours and one another. That's going to take a bit of work. If you don't mind me saying this, we're still a little middle class. Is that okay to say that? We're still a little too white. Thank God for the Nepalese congregation. We're still a little comfortable. And we're still, I think one of our challenges for us to truly be a welcoming family that loves and respects each other and our neighbours, I think there are amongst us, I know, there are heroes who are dealing with significant personal pain and illnesses, but they're dealing with it alone. They're not sharing the burden with each other. And we've got to learn to have the guts to be honest with each other. See, the Bible calls us to share each other's burdens. And if you are holding on to burdens and not sharing them with your brothers and sisters, you are robbing us, your church, of the privilege of learning how to stand with you. And what does it mean to love our neighbours? I think we're going to talk more about this in February, and I think there's a heart, like it's been great for me hearing some of the stories, some of the ways that God has called us out, for some of our people, to love our neighbours, but I think there's going to be more of that. There's plenty of Bible references and things in your notes, but I think God is calling us to think in new ways. And as part of that, we're going to talk, Paul and Dan, Paul Kerrison and Dan will be on the 25th of November sharing with you a bit of a new vision for where we want how we want to develop our fellowship amongst us. How do we want to see ourselves? What does it mean to actually be stepping into community in things like our small groups? What does it mean for pastoral care, for us to actually have each other's backs in small groups? What does it mean for us to step into fellowship? And how do we support our leaders in small groups? So that's coming up. We believe we need to develop our small group and kingdom cells. And what I mean by that is I think you need fellowship in groups of maybe 12 to 20 people who, like family groups, but you also need the kingdom cells. You need smaller groups, people who can look you in the eyes and say, so how's your marriage actually going? Yeah, no, really, how's it actually going? Or, how can I pray for you this week, actually? Not just... I've been really appreciating catching up with Gus and Mark every week. We go to banjos and gradually we're getting to know each other. It takes work. Fellowship takes work, and it takes trust, and it takes time. And we're learning how to pray for each other. And there's something about actually being forced. When someone says, so how are you going? There's something about people actually asking that question and forces you to answer it. And often I haven't actually stopped to think about how I'm going. So I think we need to step into new levels of fellowship like that. That's what we're talking about, is that over the next 12 to 18 months, we need to find ways of encouraging it to happen. We want to establish an intentional culture of safety and transparency with processes that reinforce it. As a church family, we need to face the fact that even with the best will in the world, bad things can happen. And we need to have a place where we speak the truth in love. And we want to make sure we are a safe place for everybody. Too many ministries have imploded because there wasn't enough safety and transparency. There wasn't enough fellowship. So we want to... John Bignell's helping lead the way in this, and we'll be sharing more. And it's going to take change. It's going to take effort. We want to develop the Foundations course so it can be accessible by small groups and online. And let me tell you, my heart for this Foundations course is it's not like an alpha course that you do once, or do a course once and it's done. The Foundations course is my best explanation of the kind of church we want to become. It's the DNA of the church we want to become. As we learn to listen, to give feedback, as we learn to think about what the glory of God is, we want to find ways of taking that stuff seriously and find a way to make it available to the world. With Stu, we want to implement a communication strategy where we're not just on the back foot, but we're on the front foot of communicating our heart to this city and stepping into some of the complicated questions facing our city. And we want to find ways of naming and documenting the ways we work together in teams. I don't know how you hear all this. And as I said, as I was getting up, I was processing. I don't know. My prayer is that the heart that I felt I had to get through has got through somehow. I believe God is calling us to have a bigger vision than a church. He's calling us to the city and to the world. And as part of that, on your seats, both at Lena Valley and here, you have either pink or green slips. As part of the Baptist Fellowship, this is a particular week of prayer for global interaction, which is the Baptist mission arm, and there is this sense that it's particularly right this weekend for us to be stretching our heart and caring about those places that are yet to hear the gospel. And I still don't know what it means. Part of one of the things that we'll need to be doing in here is one that we'll talk more about is we're going to need to work together to name what God is calling us to in the world. There are all kinds of mission organisations doing all kinds of wonderful things, but what is particularly God inviting us as Citywide Baptist Church? How is He inviting us to respond and step into that space? I know He is, but we together are going to need to do some work on what that looks like. What I would like you to do now, though, is it's the way God's lined it up, and it feels like this week, with all kinds of things happening this month, God is calling us. Even the fact that next week we are cutting a service short to join the local RSL for Remembrance Day. I think it's all part of God saying, this is the kind of ways of thinking I'm inviting you to do. This is the kinds of things I'm wanting you to step into more. But I want to take a minute or two now, as we've been talking about the future for our church, just to create some space. You might like to pray with the people with you. In a minute I'm going to come back and we're going to finish with our corporate benediction here, and at Lena Valley you can do that separately. But I just want to create some space to again lift our eyes beyond ourselves, beyond the vision for this church, and lift our eyes to what God is doing in the world. And there are places, and it may be that you find that God has laid a particular place on your heart. Feel you don't have to be guided completely by these words, but here are some simple prayers you can be praying right now. And I invite you to pray these prayers, and let's, Holy Spirit, please stretch our heart to all that you're doing in this world. Stretch our heart to this city. Help our heart and our church reflect your church and your heart, Jesus. We want you to be the head of this church. We want your heart to be at the centre of this church. And I think part of what God's doing in getting us to the timing of all this is to keep lifting our eyes. So I just want to create some space now for a minute or two, and then we'll come back and close the service. So either just quietly by yourself or with people around you, take some time to step into praying for those places that most desperately need the gospel. And you might even find that God raises something particularly for you to pray for, so pray for that. Don't feel limited to these prayers. Go for it.